Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. In today's video, we're going to be installing our Strike Rock sliders that you can see here on our 2nd gen Toyota Sequoia. So out with the old, in with the new. You must first get your factory steps removed if your Sequoia is equipped with them. These are pretty easy to get off, which is why we're not really showing you the whole process. You can see the 8 mounting holes along these 4 brackets. And you'll just need a 12mm socket, ideally on an impact, to get those bolts removed. There's nothing supporting them, they're not slotted or anything once you have those out, so make sure this is supported so it doesn't come down on you when you take out the final hardware. Now the cool part about your one-piece welded rock slider is that this is ready to go on the truck right out of the box. However, there's just a couple things we need to do up on the frame that we'll walk you through before this can go into place. Now the first item once you get up here is unbolting this parking brake cable from the frame so that our slider can slide into position up here behind it. The bracket that needs to be unbolted is this one you see here, and for that you'll need a 12mm socket. There's another bracket back here on this rear body mount that can be removed temporarily just to give you a little extra slack in this cable if needed when getting your slider into position. From there, you'll need some sort of pry tool to remove the series of plastic clips or hole fillers, if you will, that run along this side of the frame. You can see we have a couple removed back here already, but there's still some remaining up here toward the center. With those couple things out of the way, you are now ready to position this up alongside the frame and start getting your hardware installed. Just to point out, the kind of bend in our flange over here, as well as a part number cut out into the side of that, goes toward the front of the vehicle. So that should help you identify the driver's versus passenger's side, and you can then start positioning this up there. Now in our case, we're doing this here on a lift, obviously. So I'm gonna put down a blanket or some rags or something to protect our powder coated slider from the hoist arms you see up here. And I'll need to have a friend help me out with lifting that up into position here. If you're doing this in a driveway or in your garage, for example, you can achieve kind of the same thing we're gonna do up here with just a floor jack and some jack stands to kind of help hold this in position as well. And once you get your slider moved into position where it is fairly tight against the frame along the bottom as well as the side, you need to start locating it properly from front to rear. So there's a couple indicating factors here. One is simply the cut profile along the inside edge of your slider and the way it follows the bottom edge of the frame. Here on the driver's side specifically, you will look for this slotted hole in the bottom flange of the slider to line up with a threaded factory hole in the frame. For that location, we provide you an M8x125 bolt that will thread into there and help locate this slider. You'll have this same hole on the passenger side, however, it will not be threaded over there, so you'll have to drill that one out and install a thread cutting bolt, which we'll go over in just a few minutes. Now there is a small chance that this has to be relocated in just a moment, but ideally we're gonna start with the bolt centered in this slot and then just snug it up for now with a 13mm socket. From there, you can come up toward the front where you saw that bend in your slider bracket here earlier on and check kind of how that is fitting to the frame. And then you'll look at the 2 mounting holes up here along this side to make sure they are lined up with the through holes on the frame, as well as the 3rd mounting hole, which falls just behind this mounting leg. Once you're happy with the location and everything looks good there, it's a good idea to just take a quick step back and look at your slider visually, making sure everything looks right between the slider and the vehicle, and we can then begin to install some mounting hardware. Now for these 3 front mounting holes along the frame, you'll have a series of 1/2" hardware that needs to be installed. As you can kind of see here, one of these is longer than the other 2, and that longer bolt will go in the front mounting hole up here, leaving the shorter 2 to go in the next 2 holes along this side. Now obviously we're just working on the driver's side, so you'll have a mirror image of this or 3 more bolts for the passenger side. Now along the outside here, you want to install a 1/2" washer along with the bolt before getting those installed through the frame. And then along the inside, you are going to have a larger 3/4 washer along with a 1/2" washer and a nylock nut that need to be stacked in this fashion there on the inside. That gets a little bit easier to show you on these next two bolts, so we'll show that in just a moment. Now here on the inside, you can get a better look at that washer and nylock nut combination. Once you have all three of these in, you can use these to start drawing the slider in tight to the frame with a 3/4 socket and wrench. Just be sure that you're not over tightening these and compressing the frame, since there is not a solid slug in between there to tighten against. When you tighten your hardware for the final time, you do want to make sure that these bolts are engaging with the nylock or thread lock on the end of the nuts that you can see here. From this point, all of your remaining mounting hardware will be the 1/2-inch flanged thread cutting bolts that you see here. These will require you to drill a 7/16 hole using the slider itself as a guide at all of the remaining mounting hole locations. So you should have 5 of these holes along this bottom flange, as well as 2 more toward the rear of the slider out along the side. Just like if you were tapping a hole, these do require you to drill a pilot hole so that the bolt will start. So we will start out with a center punch at each hole location. Now the hole size required for that bolt is 7/16. However, we're going to start small with our 1/8-inch drill bit here and work our way up to that size. So with our hole center punched, we'll go ahead and drill our first pilot here. And then just continuing on with a series of larger drill bits until we reach that 7/16 hole size. With the appropriate hole size drilled, you'll need a 3/4 socket. You can then use an impact to drive this bolt in. If you have selectable settings on your impact, it's a good idea to start low and work your way up, just to prevent any possibility of stripping these out. From there, you can simply repeat that process on all of the remaining 1/2-inch mounting holes. Once you get through getting all of those drilled and installed, it's just a matter of going back through and kind of tightening up all your hardware. Again, taking one final step back and making sure you like the way this looks against the side of the truck. And then we just have a couple small things to tidy up to complete your install. So back here, to get your parking brake cables tied back up, we provide you a isolator clamp that you will wrap around the cable in this orientation so that these bolt holes are toward the outside or away from the frame. And then you're going to be aligning this and installing a bolt in the hole you see here that used to be for your factory side steps. With that started, if you'll remember from the teardown side of things, you'll need your 12mm socket to thread this in and tighten it up. From there, you just want to check a couple clearances. As I mentioned earlier on, this rear clamp should be able to be reinstalled. Full disclosure, I actually broke the bolt off for this clamp, so I have a little more work to do here, but holding it in the general location that it would have been in from the factory, you can kind of see that it provides clearance between the cable and this body mount bolt, or stud if you will. You want to retain that, but if this is feeling tight at all, these are pretty easy to bend, so you could kind of manipulate this up and in. Again, just making sure that you have adequate clearance, but also gaining a little slack in here. As for the other clip that you see here, just a little farther forward on the frame, this one can actually be removed from the cable. There's a couple different ways you can do that. You could come in here with a cutoff wheel and just carefully trim this off and make sure to sand any sharp edges. You could also completely remove it. Again, these are pretty easy to bend and manipulate. So if you work at this long enough, you can kind of get it to open up, where you can then grab a hold of the inside with a pair of pliers and sort of peel this open and slide it off of the cable. Once you have that cable tidied up, you can go repeat this whole installation process over on the other side if you haven't done so already to get that passenger side slider installed. And from there, the only thing you should really have left to do is install your logo tread plates if you purchased those at the time you purchased your sliders. So those will show you the install of out on the bench. However, they could be installed before the slider goes on the truck or now with the slider in place up here. Now with these, there's a couple different things I want to point out to get started. Obviously they are going to come as 2 separate pieces. So if you're doing a whole set, you'll have 4 of these. They're a mirrored part, so you'll just need to essentially flip them over to have fronts and rears. Along with that, the bolt pack for these is shared across a couple different products here at Victory 4x4. So you're going to have a couple extra bolts in here that may not be used when installing just these tread plates. From there, the install should be pretty easy and straightforward. You'll just need a 5/32 hex of some sort and a 7/16 socket or wrench. So you're going to receive your tread plates in 2 separate pieces. So if you're doing a whole set, you're going to get 4 of these. To make fronts and rears, you simply flip them over as they are a mirrored part. Before these get bolted down, we do provide you adhesive backed rubber pads to kind of isolate them from the slider. So we'll get these out of the way for just a moment and show you how to put these in place. Now before these go down, you just want to make sure that all of the surfaces you're sticking them to are nice and clean and free of any oils or residue. So we just have an alcohol prep pad here. You can use rubbing alcohol on a clean rag or towel if that's what you have available. Just make sure you're using something that won't leave any residue here. Now you do have a couple different shapes of these adhesive pads. You're going to have triangles and rectangles. The triangles are for out on each end of your slider, leaving the rectangles for the center mounts in here. If you've ever put on a sticker, you can figure out how to put these on. You're just going to peel the backer, making sure to try not to touch this adhesive more than necessary, and then you're just lining it up carefully with the slot in the center of the mount and pressing it down on. So we'll repeat that process on all of the remaining mounts here. At this point, you need to get some of your hardware ready. So one thing I will point out with your bolt pack is it's shared across a couple products here at Victory. So you'll expect to have a couple extra bolts in here that are not needed for this installation. With that being said, the bolts you will need are going to be the 1/4-20 button heads. So they're the smaller black button heads in your bolt pack. You're going to have the largest quantity of those, and that's what's going to secure this down to the slider. Along with those, you're going to have washers for every bolt and flanged nylock nuts to go underneath. From here, this is pretty straightforward. You just have to lay the tread plate out and align it with the slots, and then work your way through installing hardware into every bolt hole. Now you do want to get all of this hardware loosely installed before aligning and tightening up the tread plates. Once you have all your hardware loosely installed and both of the tread plates down in place, you'll need a 7/16 wrench or socket for underneath and a 5/32 hex of some sort to tighten these button head bolts. Now when tightening these, you will have to closely pay attention to the alignment of the tread plate and the slider. The most critical location is here in the center. You want to make sure that these are nice and tight together. You can check the edges here to make sure they're nice and even, and then you'll kind of know that you have everything aligned well when the gap, if any, here in the center is nice and straight and it's not opened up on one end and tight on the other, for example. So with that information, you can work towards lining these up and centering them up, and then begin tightening your hardware. Now since we're using nylock nuts here, you don't have to go crazy when tightening these down. You just want to make sure, one, that the bolt protrudes through the locking feature on the back end of the nut, and that these are down tight against that adhesive rubber pad so that there's no potential for them to move or rattle. Now if you notice any excessive buckling along the centers of these, or bowing if you will, that just means you need to come back and slightly loosen the surrounding hardware in that location to allow it to settle back in. Again, just making sure that it's still tight to that rubber. And really that's all there is to getting these installed. With your tread plates now bolted on, your installation is complete. So as always, if you guys have any questions at all about this installation or anything else we offer here at Victory 4x4, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.